panelists for today include Corey Ramsden, the VP of Go Solar Programs at Solar United Neighbors. We are also joined by Charles Hua, policy analyst from Rewiring America. We also have Suhashini and Paul, who are electrification homeowners here in Colorado. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and pass it over to Corey to get into our presentation today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome and thanks for joining us this evening. As Sarah said, my name is Corey Ramsden. I'm the head of our Go Solar Programs team here at Solar United Neighbors. And I'm going to spend a little time today, but I'm going to try to make as much time as possible for our folks at Rewiring America to share their information, and also time at the end for your questions. So just first, I just want to set the table a little bit in terms of what part of why we're here, which is that solar is expanding all across the country. 3 million plus homes with rooftop solar or solar on properties right now, and that is just predicted to increase over the next decade plus. And we just want to help people understand a little bit better about how they can take advantage not only of solar but also of electrification, which is a great pairing for it. Next slide. A little bit about sort of the way that we look at the world is we are a solar advocacy organization. We're nonprofit as well as vendor neutral and financing neutral. So really what we're trying to do is help people go solar, uniting them together and then ultimately encouraging people to support better solar policies, both at the local level all the way up to the national level. And that's really pinned in something or based in something we call energy democracy, which is a vision of a cleaner and fairer energy system. In a system like that, power, electrical, political, and economic is shifted from the few to the many. So rather than a few monopoly utilities and their investors dominating the energy system, everyday households and businesses have a seat at the table. That means that we collectively get a say in how and where electricity is generated, and we can share the financial benefits of direct participation in that energy system. So in short, energy democracy is really about direct control of our energy system and sharing that back with local communities. Next slide. The concept I'd like for you all to keep in mind tonight is that you're building your home, your business, whatever it may be, is a resource to the grid. And that means not just the solar on the roof, but also the electric appliances and things inside. And they become more valuable as the grid introduces more solar and more batteries and storage and more electrification. Next slide. So what that means really is that solar on your roof is really fuel for that electrification, fuel for those things that are using electricity on your site. The energy that you generate from your roof that you use right on the spot locally is the cleanest, most efficient version of electricity production. That solar that's flowing into your electric panel and going to a heat pump or a hot water heater or an induction cooktop or whatever it may be, or charging your electric vehicle, that is as local and direct as you can get with solar production. And of course, we need the grid and we need to be able to share those electrons, but this is a really key component to what we see as the future of the electricity system. Next slide. And what that means really, and what you're going to hear about for the rest of the presentation really, is that electrification means more distributed energy resources on the grid, more customer-owned resources. And that's not just solar and batteries and EV chargers, but it's also things like heat pumps and water heaters and smart appliances that can decide maybe collectively even between different homes and groups of homes when to use electricity, when to not use electricity. These things can be organized and orchestrated to be able to support the grid as solar and wind and other renewable energies increase in the amount of energy that they're supplying to the grid. Really exciting stuff. It's something that is already happening in a lot of places, and electrification is really one of those core underpinnings to what we're talking about. It's not just that local solar generation, it's the devices that we're looking at encouraging adoption of, and the Inflation Reduction Act, which you'll hear a lot more about from our presenters at Rewiring America, is really going to drive a lot of that adoption. So I'm going to stop and get out of the way for our guests to come and speak a little bit more, but I just want to say thank you for joining us this evening. Please put your questions to us, and we look forward to hearing more from our next presenter, Charles. Next slide, thanks.
Well, thanks, Corey, and thanks so much, everyone, for taking some time out of your your Wednesday evening or afternoon to join us and talk solar. It's thrilling, solar and electrification. It's thrilling to see all the interest in this topic. So if you go to the next slide, kind of just teeing up a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today. So starting with kind of why electrify, particularly for a lot of folks here who may have solar, what's in it for them for electrification. And then talking a little bit about how organizations like Rewiring America can help with your efforts to electrify, how to take advantage of different rebates, incentives, and other opportunities out there. And then lastly, what is the relationship between electrification and solar, and how can you electrify after installing solar? So if you go to the next slide. So let's start with that first question. Why electrify? Next slide. Just to share a little bit about Rewiring first. Rewiring America was founded as a nonprofit in 2020 with a simple idea, which is to electrify everything. And that includes anything from the cars and vehicles under transportation. That includes the manufacturing facilities and industrial plants under the industrial sector. And that also includes buildings. But we're starting with where we live, learn, play, and work. So those entities closest to the people and the communities. If you go to the next slide. So 42% of the energy-related emissions in the US come from decisions that we make around the kitchen table. So that's anything from the cars we drive to how we heat and cool our homes to the machines we cook with, etc. And that's a lot of power for individual households. And a lot of the clean energy transition will be running through the decisions that American households make at the kitchen table. If you go to the next slide. We have an ambitious goal in front of us, which is for every single machine in the US to be efficient, electric, clean by 2050. That's in part to reach zero emissions by 2050. But if you think about all of the gas furnaces, so a gas furnace might last 15 years. And so by 2035, we can't be installing any more gas furnaces if we want to actually reach 100% electric machines by 2050. If you go to the next slide. There's a lot of machines in American homes. In fact, there's roughly 1 billion or so. Again, the cars that we drive to the stoves to the HVAC systems, collectively, that's 1 billion machines, and that kind of goes to show the scale of the problem that we have at hand. It's certainly not going to be easy to make sure that all of these machines are transitioned to clean electric options, but that is the mandate that we have in front of us. Next slide. So what's the good news? Well, the good news is that we know how to produce clean electricity. Certainly folks on this call know that very, very well. Rooftop solar and all forms of solar being a key part of that. It's affordable, it's abundant, it's reliable, it's clean, it's great. Now, in addition to clean energy and clean electricity, it's important that we also electrify as much of, again, the transportation, buildings, and industrial sector as we can, and power that with clean electricity. That's how we actually drive the emissions reductions in part that we're looking for. If you go to the next slide. So the good thing about going electric is that it's actually a good thing. And if you think about a heat pump, it's much more efficient than the current option, which is a fossil fuel or even electric resistance furnace. The nice thing about a heat pump is that it can both heat and cool your home. So it's multifunctional in that way. If you go to the next slide. Similarly, a heat pump water heater, again, much more efficient than a traditional fossil fuel-based water heater, and it still gives you all the warm showers and allows you to reap the same benefits that you would with much greater efficiency. Next slide. Same for an EV. An electric vehicle, it means that you don't need to go to the gas station. It's much less maintenance and operations, and you can fill it up on your own time, whether that's overnight, and you can often do that at your home. And it's more fun to drive. It's a nicer experience. And if you go to the next slide, for rooftop solar, again, folks here are very intimately familiar with rooftop solar and all the benefits, but you can power your home with the sun, and that system can provide you resilience, particularly if you pair that with a battery storage system. Next slide. A heat pump dryer, same thing, more efficient, and you don't need venting. Next slide. So lastly, an induction stove. It's very easy to clean. It's very responsive, fast, and reliable, and it won't pollute your home. So some folks on this call might be familiar with a lot of the studies out there showing the harmful health impacts of existing stoves. An induction stove has all of the benefits without the negatives. And so these 6 technologies and machines and appliances are crucial as part of this electrification transition that we're talking about today. These 6 machines make up effectively the key electrification decisions that any household reasonably needs to make. And combined, they have a big impact. And the really great thing is that it doesn't really require any sacrifice in an immediate sense in terms of comfort or sort of the convenience or the enjoyability of the experience. In fact, oftentimes it's a much superior alternative to existing machines for those reasons. So if you go to the next slide, just to kind of reiterate that point a little bit further. So indoor pollution is really harmful to health. Children living in a home with a gas stove have an elevated risk of developing asthma. And that's at the individual level, but that's also true at the community and population health level. If you go to the next slide. Air pollution is particularly deadly. And so eliminating the demand for fossil fuels, in part by electrifying our appliances and devices, would prevent, as part of the effort, to prevent over 50,000 premature deaths per year. If you go to the next slide. So that's great. Here's the opportunity to electrify everything. How do you actually make sense of all of this? So that's where Rewiring America comes in. If you go to the next slide. So Rewiring America, as I mentioned, was started with this simple mission of electrifying everything. And we operate with the fundamental belief that our electric future is promoting an abundance agenda and that it benefits everyone through reduced energy bills, through safer, healthier, more resilient homes, and ultimately through a cleaner, healthier planet. And so there's a lot of reasons to get behind an electric future. And different folks have different reasons for switching to electric appliances, but in general, the push for electrification offers plenty of advantages and benefits for folks who are looking to engage in that transition. If you go to the next slide. There are some key barriers to be clear in terms of electrification. So you can break them down in terms of certainly the financial barriers with high upfront costs, insufficient or insufficiently flexible financing options, or lack of equitable access to these technologies. So it's very important that policy and other interventions directly combat some of these concerns. There are certainly policy and regulatory barriers that create misaligned utility incentives. There's a status quo bias in favor of a lot of these fossil fuel machines and appliances, or there's policies that are inequitable. So those are additional barriers that need to be addressed. And then lastly, there's kind of in this other barriers bucket, that's anything from workforce shortages to lack of contractor availability or awareness or training, to a need for other technological upgrades before electrification. If you go to the next slide. So to help support that journey, Rewiring America has put together a couple of resources that hopefully are particularly useful to folks in this audience. So first of all, that's a Go Electric guide to the IRA that spells out sort of this free electric bank account that folks have access to, thanks in large part to the incentives under the Inflation Reduction Act. It includes case studies, background info, et cetera. And if you go to the next slide, there is an additional resource that my colleague Joel wrote on electrifying everything in your home. So a step-by-step plan and a framework for how to plan and what to do, even for renters. Next slide. So it's a good segue to what exactly are the rebates and incentives that folks on this call can take advantage of. So next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, electrification is no longer a pipe dream in large part due to the carrots and the incentives and financial benefits associated with the Inflation Reduction Act. It makes purchasing these machines a lot less expensive for most Americans. Next slide. So that includes the electrification rebates. And these are point of sale rebates that provide up to $14,000 for electric appliances, including heat pumps. And this is targeted at low and moderate income households. And state energy offices will be standing up these programs as early as now, but realistically for most state energy offices into 2024. And for low income households, it covers 100% of the project costs. And for middle income households, it covers 50%. If you go to the next slide. There's kind of a sister program with the efficiency rebates. And these are for whole home retrofits that are either modeled or measured to improve energy efficiency. And this is applicable to everyone with doubling of rebate amounts for low income households. And similarly, state energy offices are actively working to stand up these programs now, but again, realistically for most into 2024. And there's two different pathways to claim the rebates based on either modeled or measured energy savings, but the total amount depends on how much you're actually forecasted to save, but it can be up to $8,000 or more for low income households. Next slide. So those are the rebates, and the rebates, are targeted for lower and moderate income households in large part because historically the focus from a policy standpoint has been to incentivize through tax credits, but there are still tax credits available to folks. That includes the 25C tax credit for energy. It's called the energy efficiency tax credit, which gives a 30% tax credit for residential efficiency and electrification upgrades up to $3,200 a year. And this also applies to renters and anyone with sufficient federal tax liability can claim these all the way up through 2032. If you go to the next slide, there's also the 25D clean energy tax credit, which many folks on this call are very familiar with, of course. This is primarily for the purchase and installation of solar panels, geothermal heat pumps, and battery storage as a new feature as part of this tax credit. Again, anyone with enough federal tax liability, including renters, are eligible for these tax credits, and they are available starting now through 2034, and they're uncapped and can be carried forward from a programmatic level. Next slide. So, talking a little bit more about some of the resources that Rewiring America has developed. Some of you may be familiar with the IRA Savings Calculator. This is a tool that's directly on the Rewiring America website that allows you to see how much money you'll get from the Inflation Reduction Act. And here's kind of a sample screen showing what it looks like on your phone, for example. And if you go to the next slide, on your laptop or computer, this is the view that you get. And so if you type in some very basic facts about where you live, your income, your tax filing status, and your household size, the tool spits out the incentives that you have available to you. Next slide. So there's a lot of different ways that folks can benefit from incentives to support their electrification journeys. Now, I mentioned a couple from the federal level through the Inflation Reduction Act. So, of course, those are rebates and tax credits. But at the state, local, and utility levels, depending on where you live, you might have access to additional rebates and tax credits, or perhaps grants, green bonds, zero to low interest loans, and also on-bill financing, perhaps through your utility. You go to the next slide. So to kind of close out this presentation, shifting a little bit of talking about, okay, say you've adopted solar and you're thinking about electrification, how should you think about, all of this? How do you make sense of all of this? How do you defend your savings, if you will? Next slide. So the point in kind of illustrating, so we're going to illustrate a couple different pathways. Everyone has a different approach that makes sense for them, but just to illuminate a couple different ways to potentially think about this. So one way to think about it is to start with storage. Storage being a great technology to provide resilience and a strong foundation for greater home electrification down the road. Now, this is particularly sensible if you're focused on independence from the grid, and having backup power and resilience can be an option to buy a battery to store your solar, power your home during peak hours when the grid is most expensive. Of course, there's challenges around the upfront cost for home storage. An average battery can cost up to $16,000, and the average tax credit will be around $4,800. Now, your costs are going to depend on a variety of factors, including the size of your house, the size of your planned storage unit, but storing excess energy from the solar that you generate through your rooftop solar system allows you to pull from your own energy during anything from peak hours when grid electricity is the most expensive to disaster scenarios or grid disruptions where you'll really want that resilience. If you go to the next slide. Another way to think about things is to start with the oldest machine or technology. So if your heating or cooling system is going to fail very soon because it's coming up on the end of the appliance lifetime, then it might make sense to upgrade, let's say, that system to a heat pump first. And so getting ahead of a potential emergency now can enable you to have the flexibility and comfort to know that you'll be able to weather that storm, in addition to providing efficiency and savings for your solar powered home now. Next slide. You can also think about starting with the dirtiest. So if you're particularly inclined to reduce your personal household emissions, then it might make sense to tackle the biggest CO2 culprit and start with an electric vehicle. And that allows you to substantially reduce your carbon emissions. And again, EVs, there are upfront costs, but they also reduce to substantial operating savings. And you can calculate how much solar you need with this nifty tool from Solar United Neighbors on EVs. Next slide. The fourth and last kind of approach that we've identified here is a sort of plan now, decide later approach, which is totally valid. Now, solar is a great investment. And you do have time to electrify. So it might be important for folks on this call to think really critically about what matters most to you, whether that's reduced energy bills, whether that's reduced greenhouse gas emissions, whether that's a healthier home, whether that's more resilient in your home, whatever it is. It can often be very helpful to have a plan now and then decide to invest later. And that's where rewiring comes in. So next slide. You can probably actually skip to the very next one. So coming very soon is what we're calling the Personal Electrification Planner. So this is a tool that Rewiring America has put together and is releasing soon, that basically allows you to input some assumptions about your home and data points, and gives you a personalized, tailored electrification plan, step by step, for how you can electrify your home. So our tools are designed to be user-friendly. So we're going to ask for as little information as possible, and we'll supplement that with existing data sets on building and community characteristics, as well as federal, state, and local electrification incentives and energy and equipment prices. So smart assumptions, and take those and generate a personalized plan. Next slide. So here's kind of a screenshot previewing what this looks like. Again, machine by machine, appliance by appliance, presenting a clear roadmap that's personalized to your specific electrification and household electrification journey. Now, people can correct these assumptions or validate them. And we've heard from many folks that it can be hard to know what to do first. So the point of this tool is to be a resource to make sure that your priorities are reflected in this plan so that you can sequence the potential projects that you're looking to pursue accordingly. Next slide. And again, here's kind of additional what it looks like. And part of this, which is really cool, is connecting to contractors. So providing sort of a listing of available contractors to actually do the job in your specific community. And we'll also provide some insight into how you can stack your incentives and plan your projects accordingly. So we've heard from consumers that they may not know how to execute a project once they decide what to do. So this tool is meant to take it a step further in going into specific projects and connect consumers with contractors and financing, and really make this as seamless as possible of a transition for your home. So I want to just close by kind of, let's take a deep breath. So we've talked about the need for electrification. We've talked about the opportunities for electrification. We've talked about how Rewiring America fits in. But just to kind of close things out and summarize what opportunity we have, if you go to the next slide, it's really this. So within this decade, we must change the market default so that efficient electric machines are the most affordable and convenient to purchase and install for everyone. So that's a bold and daunting task in many ways. So if you look at our pace of progress charts, for us to reach 100% electric appliances by 2050, we're going to need to make sure that all sales of appliances are electric as early as a decade from today, 2032. And so in order for us to actually get there, we're going to need to make sure that we're actually getting the systems in place from a market, from a policy, from a regulatory standpoint, to actually make sure that everybody, particularly historically underrepresented and underinvested in groups and populations, can actually benefit from these technologies that advance this abundance agenda of a cleaner, healthier, safer, more resilient, more reliable future for American homeowners. And if you go to the last slide. So the great news about all of this is that it's working. Electrification is fundamentally a story of abundance and human flourishing. And it's centering people and communities in this transition. And we like to say it's all of the American dream, but half the energy and none of the emissions. And so thanks so much, everybody, for your interest in electrification. We're thrilled that you all are interested in clean energy and electrification, and looking forward to the questions that folks have in the chat and afterwards.
Thank you so much, Charles. It was so great to hear all of that wonderful information. And folks, just a reminder, we will be addressing questions here at the end of the webinar. But now I'd like to pass it over to Suhashini and Paul, who are homeowners in Colorado that have taken significant steps to electrify their home. So I will pass the mic.
And one of the things Charles highlighted, that that roadmap thing would have been great when we were doing our project. And this is a picture of our house. We have 2 solar arrays on there. You can see our Tesla in front of it. So a lot of the roadmap steps that he was talking about, we ran through, and unfortunately without some of the tools that are available now. So those sound pretty exciting. But our first step that we did in the journey was we were looking at Excel Energy, our local provider, and they had something called WindSource. So we started to kind of green our energy that way. We paid a small fee per kilowatt hour to have green power. We were in a condo at the time, unable to do that, but also we started using time of use pricing. And then we really started to pay attention to our energy usage, and that kind of started to get us ready for some of the other things that we did later.
Oh, so you can just jump over to the next slide. We wanted just to present this to you as a timeline. And so he just talked about the wind source. Then our real first major step toward electrification was buying our vehicle. We chose a Tesla Model 3. At the time when we purchased it back in 2018, there wasn't a ton of option, really just a Leaf and Tesla. Now there's many. As you drive around, you'll see all sorts of cars on the road that are electrified, and we're so excited about that. Then back in 2020, we decided to purchase that house that you just saw. As he mentioned, the solar arrays that were on that outbuilding were already there when we purchased the house. That wasn't a must-have for us, but was really fabulous because we got to take advantage of the work that somebody else had already done. We moved in, that solar was up and running, and we were able to take advantage of that right away, which was really great for us.
What we did to kind of lay out some of this blueprint is we started with a home energy audit. That was actually paid for by our natural gas vendor at the time, Excel Energy, for that house. There were kind of like three major things that they did. They did like visual inspections of things and highlighted things to do. They used an infrared camera to highlight like areas that were air leaking and creating cold, missing insulation. We actually found that we had a broken heat delivery stack in a wall, and that wall was actually like 20 degrees warmer than the rest of the house. And
they also did a blower door test. Essentially, your house isn't as airtight as you think it is. It's got passage of air. The standard today is that the air should cycle through your home 3 times completely per hour. And the house that we purchased, the one you just saw, was 6.4 times per hour, so over twice the standard today. Essentially, it was a leaky sieve. You don't see the air leaking, so what they do is they actually came through and take photographs. We got a 28-page report with everything that was leaking, all the way to our outlets, the hood above our oven, things we never would have thought of that were actually energy sucks on our house.
And the fun thing was it was paid for by the natural gas supplier, which we later canceled based on that report, which was fun.
But it did really give us a roadmap to move forward. It pinpointed exactly where in our house. We had, as we said, purchased this home with solar. We knew we were going to add more. We didn't want to be people that graded a bunch of energy by solar and then essentially have it leak back out, right? We wanted to capture as much as we could. So that home energy audit was a real fabulous thing for us on our journey.
And we started looking at like where else we were using gas. And so we started to electrify our lawn equipment, which we did riding lawnmowers, chainsaw, snow blower, leaf blower, like all the types of things you'd use around the house.
Yeah, so we decided at that time, again, there wasn't a ton of option. We picked one company rather, and they have interchangeable batteries that work on all of their products, which was really useful for us. And so now there's more on the market, of course, but you definitely had to manage your batteries a little bit.
Yeah, especially when I started with a push mower, I had 3 batteries, so I would start mowing, and when that battery was exhausted, I would swap it with the fresh one, put it on the charger. So with 3, you could pretty much mow continuously. The next thing we did is we added a ground source heat pump. We really started to electrify inside the house. So the heat pump, we did an air source heat pump hot water heater. There was a gas insert in our fireplace. We converted back to wood. There's been a lot of questions I saw in the chat with the heat pump stuff. Air source has become a lot more affordable and available, especially in colder zones. The technology keeps improving. From a ground source perspective, it works in a colder climate, but it's a lot more expensive. And the nice thing about there was a lot of chatter about the hot water heater, but the ground source heat pump also preheats the water going into our hot water heater, makes it even more efficient. But it is a little bit louder than another system. It's not super loud. It's kind of like a quiet air compressor, so you can kind of hear it in the house when it's going, but again, depends on the models you're using and such also.
So you can see there, we're not going to really discuss more, but in December 2021, we updated our insulation, again, just trying to trap as much of that energy in form of heat in our house as we could. And then finally, about a year and a half ago, we added that additional solar array onto our house. We went with Tesla, not because we love them as a company, but simply because they were much cheaper. We priced out 3 and they were cheaper by 2/3. It was quite a significant margin for us. And so
yeah, and we added 3 power walls, which were really nice. I know that came up in there the previous presentation a lot. Also, it kind of allowed us to try to go grid free, where we're pretty much carbon neutral. It's hard for us to stay grid free. Try not to pull energy from the grid all year during the winter, and if we do a lot of driving, charging drains a lot of power. But being able to kind of work with the grid instead of off of it has been really nice. But also, like power outages and stuff that happen in the neighborhood, we don't even notice. So battery storage systems can be really nice for that. A lot of the stuff that Charles presented is really helpful and addresses a lot of the challenges that we've had. But one of the things that he really highlighted is it makes it really incremental. Like, you can choose to do various things. You don't have to do everything at once.
absolutely. I think we didn't put this in our timeline, but in between each of these points that we're showing you was saving up the money to do the next thing. And everything felt like a little bit of a win for us. I remember we celebrated buying our car and then adding more solar. Everything felt like a win. We really made each of those feel like a monumental moment for us. And
yeah, and like finding contractors and stuff was really challenging. We use a lot of like county lists and things like that. So having better tools to locate contractors that specialize in this is really helpful.
I think that's really where organizations like Solar United Neighbors and Rewiring America are so powerful, because they can help people like us that don't work in this business, that have full-time jobs and other things outside of this, really have all of these tools at one time and place to go ahead and move forward with our goals. PK particularly spent hours of time doing research, and having that tool, for example, that Charles talked about, I think are just such fabulous things. So it's been great to watch the progression of this industry overall.
Yes, thanks for the time and letting us share our story.
Absolutely. Back to you, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. And folks, I have been to their home and it's quite impressive. So definitely something to strive towards. Now I think we can kind of move forward into answering some of the questions that are in the chat. So Charles and Corey, I know you're both experts in your field. We can all kind of just tag team, but can you briefly describe more about what a heat pump is, and does it work more effectively in certain climates?
I'm gonna have to defer to Charles on that. Sorry.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, happy to take that on. In essence, a heat pump, in a very simple sense, is sort of a 2-in-1 machine that both heats and cools your home. Now, there's kind of this misperception that they don't work in cold climates. That's actually not true. In fact, if you actually look at which state has some of the highest adoption of heat pumps and heat pump water heaters, and this surprises a lot of folks, it's Maine. And Maine, of course, not being known for being a particularly balmy place. But they work well in all sorts of different climates, and they are an efficient electric machine to heat and cool your home. Hopefully that answers that question.
That's awesome. That's super helpful, Charles. And I guess if folks are looking to, they know they're getting ready to electrify their home, how would you suggest folks determine the amount of battery storage they need for their home in order to support all of those appliances or electric vehicles and the like?
Sorry, Sarah. If that's for me, can you repeat that? Because I was in the middle of responding to another question. Multitasking. You're muted.
if folks know that they're going to embark on the journey of home electrification, what advice can we give people in terms of calculating the size and the amount of battery storage they're going to need for their home?
Yeah, I can certainly take that. I think the most important thing to keep in mind is that every home is different in terms of the loads that you're using and when. So it also depends a little bit about your goals for that storage, because the markets and the use for that storage are going to vary widely. And a lot of places, storage is about resilience and backing up things in the event of an outage. So that's a question of sizing, like what you want to back up in those, in those events. But people are also installing it into markets where there's incentives to do so, to be compensated for that battery to like help the grid, where you've got multiple uses for it. So it is it's really important when you're talking to a contractor and you're interested in storage to explain what your motivations are, like what is you want from that battery, and also to understand from them what the market conditions are where you live. Because that's going to factor into ultimately the size of system that they're going to recommend for you, not only for today, but also potentially to meet goals that you have for electrification. And we see this a lot with solar as well. People are coming wanting to put solar on, but they're also thinking about that EV charger that's coming or other things that they might want to do in the home. And it's a very custom thing. You could have two homes right next to each other using wildly different amounts of electricity because of who's in them and the equipment that's in them. So it is definitely something that you just want to investigate and also get multiple opinions on. If you're, as you're going through getting, 2 quotes or 3 quotes from people, having those conversations with contractors is really important to make sure you're getting what you are paying for something like that. And really any home improvement, to be honest.
Absolutely. No, that makes a lot of sense, and appreciate you clarifying. So if folks want to learn more about like smart appliances, for example, can they find some information about smart appliances in Rewiring America's Go Electric Guide?
Yes, yeah, and I can drop the link to that guide in the chat in case folks. Oh, you just did. Perfect.
Awesome. And then Charles, can you, I know you briefly touched on your Go Electric Guide, but can you just rehash some of the information that folks can find in that guide? Seeing quite a few questions, like specific questions in the chat, so I think this will address a few of those.
Sure. So this is really meant to be sort of a key kind of more detailed resource for folks, particularly homeowners and renters looking to electrify. So it covers anything from what is the Inflation Reduction Act and the incentives and opportunities available to folks, what are the different machines in your home, and some brief kind of descriptions about all the different appliances and machines in your home that can be electrified. It includes some case studies, some frequently asked questions, and then also kind of lays out sort of the overall kind of how you can think about the timing of different things and the sequencing, as well as a lot of the information that we talked about today in terms of the need and the importance and the opportunity of electrification, and basically what you as an individual can be doing about that if that's something that you're interested in.
Yeah, that's great. And I guess for folks that do have rentals or are in multifamily units, does the IRA apply to these homes as well?
Absolutely. Now, of course, as folks are likely aware, perhaps from their solar journeys, it can be very difficult, or more difficult, I should say, for renters and multifamily occupants to take advantage of clean energy technologies historically. But there are incentives in place for those, and certainly the tax credits for everybody. And part of the kind of Rewiring America tools, including the personal electrification planner, you can specify kind of your whether you're a homeowner or a renter, and there's still, even with the IRA savings calculator that's currently on the Rewiring America website, if you are a renter, you can see what incentives are available to you.
That's great, thank you. So just to reiterate, folks, it sounds like you can find all that information on the website. All right. How does a heat pump water heater compare to a tankless or gas water heater?
think that one's for you, Charles.
Sure, yeah, happy to take this one. So generally speaking, heat pump water heaters, that was one of like the 6 core technologies slash appliances slash machines that I mentioned that are part of the menu of machines that folks should think about in terms of electrification. So I shared effectively that the heat pump water heaters typically are much more efficient than the tankless or gas ones. And that efficiency, generally speaking, will likely save you money in the long run. So might be paying an upfront cost, but due to their efficiency, will often result in substantial operating savings, in addition to the other sort of emissions, safety, et cetera, benefits.
All right. Let's see. And then maybe we can take a couple solar questions here. I'm seeing a few of those. Corey, can you please clarify the difference between community solar and community choice aggregation?
Yeah, I think I put an answer in the questions to this too, but there's a lot of differences there. I think the main one that I highlighted in that answer is that community solar is, especially for programs that are legislatively enabled, where there's competition, which is true in a number of states, that individuals have the option to subscribe to projects, preferably, in a market where there are lots of options available, lots of different projects competing for your business. Whereas community choice aggregation is community-based, and they're making choices on behalf of residents in a particular area or a group of people who are being represented to choose a particular supply of electricity. So they both have their benefits. It's just a question of the sort of who is interacting with those options. And for community solar, it's often individuals who are choosing on their own to support a particular project or to sign up for a particular offering versus a community as a whole.
Awesome. Thank you, Corey. All right, let's see. I had a couple other ones saved here. I'm seeing a couple folks wondering when the personal electrification planner will launch. I will go ahead and put that link back into the chat. But Charles, can you give us kind of an idea of a time frame of when that will be live?
Next few months.
Okay.
So folks should be able to access that real soon.
Okay, excellent.
And there's a link that's been dropped in the chat where folks can get early access. I'll just repaste it so that it's at the top of the chat for folks.
All right, I've got that in there. I did see a question about if the IRA can retroactively support solar installations from as many as 10 years ago. Unfortunately, the IRA, you cannot receive rebates retroactively, but if you have installed your system basically from 2022 moving forward, you can take advantage of those rebates. All right, and then Charles and Corey, have you seen any other questions that you think we should cover?
I see one that's relevant. I think it's actually a solar question, but I think it's relevant to electrification as well, which is, I'm just going to read the question. Is there any policy work to allow homeowners to install more than 120% of current electrical usage in anticipation of future electrification? So what this question is referring to is that when you install solar, for example, you're often limited by local policy in terms of how much energy production you can install, and it is usually based on historic usage that has been demonstrated in the home. So oftentimes those rules allow you to install up to 100% of your energy production. This is very much based on the local regulations, usually state-based regulations. So there's some states like Maryland, for example, allows you to produce up to 200% of your energy annual usage. The compensation rate is different after 100%, but the law lets you do that. So people will often over install in preparation for electric vehicle charging, home upgrades, or what have you. Washington, DC also does that, but other places it doesn't. So the short answer is it's going to depend on where you are, and you definitely want to know that from your contractor. They can tell you feel free to reach out to us as well if you'd like, solarunitedneighbors.org/helpdesk, and we can help you track down that information. But it is ultimately a policy question that your local state, your state has made a determination of what that is, or your public utility commission. So it's usually 100%, but it varies a lot.
Thank you, Corey. And I'm seeing an interesting question here. I think a lot of folks actually have this question. And so I'm curious to hear what our panelists think. It says, I bought a home with a lot of gas appliances and fixtures. Will I be doing harm to the environment if I replace these with electric appliances and fixtures before the end of their useful life?
So this is going to depend. Now, of course, in terms of the grid cleanliness, the easy way to answer your question is probably not, particularly because generally speaking, for a lot of the reasons that I mentioned earlier, the electric appliances, particularly as the grid gets cleaner and cleaner, will only increase the kind of emissions gap over time. So you will be seeing substantial emissions reductions as a result of your electrification switch. Now, whether it makes sense at a personal level for you to prematurely replace your devices, if you just installed gas ones, I think is going to be very dependent on everyone's individual situation. And that's actually one thing that in the personal electrification planner, you can also tease out is like what your personal motivations are, and the recommendations are tailored accordingly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Let's see.
There's a couple of questions that I saw.
Yeah, please.
So first one is there a standardized process for the 50 states for implementing the rebates? Or is it up to each state? And is your utility company going to be involved? So the fun answer, or not so fun answer, is that it depends. So everybody, depending on the state that you live in, will probably experience a slightly different process for applying to and benefiting from some of these rebates. So I'm going to drop a link in the chat, but basically this program, the Home Energy Rebate Program, is entirely administered by the Department of Energy, in particular the State and Community Energy Program, or SCEP. And they earlier this summer basically released the official guidance for how states can establish these programs. And the ball is in states' courts to actually apply for the funds and implement and operationalize a lot of these plans. And so it's going to depend on your state. So in some states, it'll be run by, generally speaking, the state energy office, but they may coordinate with the utilities that implement the rebates. Sometimes there's existing rebate programs in place that may be third-party implementers or administrators. And sometimes there may be altogether different structures. So it's going to be very much dependent on your specific state. And probably the best way to find out is to reach out to your local state energy office in your state and get a sense of where they're at. Again, every state is in a different place because there's, as you can imagine, a whole ton of different Inflation Reduction Act programs that different states are thinking about and applying to. And so it's hard to provide one answer to that, but it's going to differ depending on the state. There was another question, well, two other questions that I thought were particularly interesting that I can try to tackle very quickly. And Corey, you should definitely jump in with any additional thoughts. The first is there was a question about how in Australia, residential solar only costs $1 a watt. And at that price, it would be a no-brainer for anybody with a roof to install rooftop solar. But in the US, it's closer to $3 a watt plus or minus that. So the question is basically like, why the gap and what can the US be doing to bring the cost down? So the short answer for the gap is if you actually look at the breakdown of, so folks may be familiar with the term soft costs and hard costs. Hard costs is basically the equipment, the technology itself. So the modules, the panels. The soft cost is everything else. So that's things like the customer acquisition cost, the labor, the sort of installation costs, the permitting costs, et cetera. And I've actually been looking at this question over the past several months in terms of why the difference between Australia versus the US. And a big one comes down to permitting. And so, for example, whereas in Australia, getting your rooftop solar project approved and permitted can be a matter of days, if not quicker, and it can be an entirely online and seamless process. In the US, it can take several months, as folks know. It can be very confusing, a lot of sort of red tape that you have to get through. And then at the end of that process, you may not even, be interested in adopting solar anymore. And so if we can change the permitting process in America so that we are not overly creating this undue burden for homeowners thinking about adopting rooftop solar to go through that process, that would go a long way. And part of that is there are tools in place that actually streamline these permitting processes. So there's a particular tool developed by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory called Solar App Plus, which is meant to be sort of an expedited permitting process through a digital software platform that areas having jurisdiction can use to basically streamline that process and make it a lot more effective for folks to actually get their rooftop solar panels and that project permitted and approved.
Awesome. Thank you, Charles. Did you say you had one more that you saw, or was that the last one?
I did. I feel bad about monopolizing this.
No, that's okay.
Because we're all about energy democracy here. So.
No, that's okay. Let's go for it.
Okay. Well, this may be on folks' minds, which is there's this argument that some folks are putting forth about the grid isn't ready to handle electrification, or the grid can't support electrification. So what do we do about that? And I think how we think about that is the idea that the grid isn't supporting electrification is kind of a false, but somewhat true, but largely false narrative. It's actually a problem that we should have down the road, but it's not one that we're facing right now. And so what I mean by that is some folks are probably familiar with those curves showing the tripling of electricity demand in this country over the next several decades if we want to fully electrify our economy. If we're really going to electrify our economy, then we do need to substantially modernize and expand our grid infrastructure, which certainly can't handle all this electric load now, or excuse me, in the future, if it's going to substantially grow. But it works fine for current demands. But there's a lot of, if we think about the supply side and the demand side, so right now, the demand side for electrification, if we have growth, will generally speaking, the grid can support that. But we're going to need really smart and effective policy on the supply side to make sure that as we electrify and as the electric demand grows, that the policy and regulatory support is in place for supply side measures. And that's anything from permitting reform to build out of transmission to deploying rooftop and community solar, et cetera, and energy efficiency, demand response, virtual power plants, all sorts of technologies that folks are familiar with on this call to make sure that we can actually make sure that the grid can handle substantial growth in electric load.
May I just add one thing there, Sarah?
I'm sorry.
I just want to add one thing to that.
Please.
Charles' answer was, I think, spot on. When I put this in the chat, I just want to put a little bit of inspiration on top of that, which is we have a lot of the solutions we need to solve the problems of that might come up with renewable adoption and renewable penetration increasing. We're a nation of engineers and doers. We have solutions. We just need to do the thing and make it happen. And it is more about intention and planning and policy and moving forward with decisions on how to transform our electricity system into one that works for the 21st century. This is not there are no unsolvable problems out there. Some of them might take a little longer to implement, but this is about engineering and getting it done, and not about questions of how to do something at this point. I want to just put one other question, Sarah, if that's okay, because I saw several people ask about Puerto Rico, and just we have a program there, and I know that's an area of particular interest for a lot of folks. Charles, there's some questions in there about what parts of the Inflation Reduction Act are accessible to homeowners and other residents of Puerto Rico. Is that something that you could address?
I am not the best person for that, but I believe my colleague, actually, John in the chat, responded to a couple of folks' questions on that. And
okay.
As I understand it, the incentives are available in Puerto Rico across the board.
Awesome. Is that true for the energy planner as well, the electrification planner?
Yes, and I just got confirmation. Yes, everybody in Puerto Rico is eligible across the board.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you all. And folks, I know we're a few moments after time, but I just want to close with a few final thoughts. You know, with everything that Charles and Corey and Suhashini and Paul shared with us today, that the idea is clear that there's not one route to making change. And whether that be you taking steps towards home electrification, whether that be you helping the grid by producing your own local clean energy and installing rooftop solar, or whether you decide to just get involved and help volunteer to spread the word and educate your friends and family and neighbors. These are all things that can really be beneficial to the movement. So I'm going to go ahead and pop our volunteer link in the chat. If folks are interested in getting involved or advocating for pro-solar policies at the state and federal level, please do sign up to volunteer with us at Solar United Neighbors. We will only continue to work on these issues as more solutions become available. So, and with that, I want to say thank you to Corey, to Charles, to Suhashini and Paul. I really appreciate your time here. And then folks, everyone who's joined for the webinar, we will be sending out slides, and we will also be sending out a recording of the webinar. So thank you all so much for spending your evening with us, and we'll see you soon.